Hey guys, tonight's story starts with a wet sock, a dented helmet, and a suspiciously judgmental chicken. You've woken up in a medieval village where survival isn't about gadgets or gear. It's about knowing which moss won't kill you and which neighbor might. There's no bug-out bag, no filtered straw, just a piece of stale rye and a whisper that someone in the next cottage survived last winter by eating shoe leather. Welcome to survival the old-fashioned way, and by that, we mean deeply unsupervised. But before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You wake up with straw in your ear, a suspicious draft along your spine, and the distinct feeling that something just scurried over your foot. The ceiling above you is made of dark beams and older spider webs, one of which sways gently, like it's waving good morning or considering a lawsuit. Your bed, such as it is, seems to be a sack, stuffed with whatever the previous occupant didn't want to eat. It smells faintly of turnips, fear, and something that might have once been a goat. The door creaks open before you can sit up, and a woman in an apron stained with what you hope is stew barks. Finally up, are you? Don't spill it this time. She shoves a wooden bucket into your arms. It's warm, heavy, and sloshes with the confidence of something important. You nod like that clarifies everything. She squints at you. You do remember what happened last time? You do not. You smile anyway. The universal face for, absolutely, and please leave so I can panic in peace. She mutters something that might be a blessing or a curse and disappears around the corner, apron flapping like a flag of disapproval. You look down at the bucket. It contains something. Liquid, probably. Possibly soup, possibly bathwater, possibly a potion for summoning frogs. Steam curls lazily from the surface. You sniff it. Smells like cabbage and secrets. Outside, the village is already awake in the way a hungover bear might be, grudgingly, loudly, and with a lot of unnecessary banging. The road is more mud than anything else, and your boots, which aren't yours but seemed like a good idea at the time, squelch dramatically with every step. A dog eyes you from atop a pile of firewood and sneezes as if offended by your existence. You nod respectfully. A man hauling a wheelbarrow full of something lumpy passes you and mutters, "New one. R. You." You nod again. It's your only move now. "Don't let her catch you spilling that," he says, jerking his chin toward the bucket. Last one got reassigned to dung turning. You grip the bucket tighter. The liquid inside mocks you with a wave. A child runs past, shrieking with joy or terror. Hard to tell. You attempt to follow the path the woman took, navigating the labyrinth of leaning houses, chickens with too much attitude, and at least one pig that looks like it remembers your face from a past life. You nearly trip over a cat, which doesn't flinch or move, just looks up like it's been waiting to witness your shame. You apologize. It blinks. You blink. You move on. The bucket is getting heavier. You try switching hands, then arms, then consider balancing it on your head like you've seen in paintings. You immediately dismiss that thought after a single slosh kisses your elbow. You turn a corner and find yourself in a courtyard where 3 old women are seated on mismatched stools, gossiping with the intensity of a royal court, but the grace of 3 disgruntled hens. One stops mid-sentence and eyes you. "Is that the barley soak?" she asks. You blink. Another leans forward, squinting into your bucket. "No, too cloudy. That's broth. Or bathwater," can't tell these days. You smile apologetically and keep walking, because that seems safer than answering and possibly triggering a debate that ends with someone throwing a ladle. They resume their conversation anyway, now including your posture. At the far end of the courtyard is a door that looks mildly sentient and deeply suspicious of you. You knock, gently. Nothing happens. You knock again, louder this time. The door opens slowly, as if considering its options, and reveals a room full of smoke, cackling, and what you swear is a chicken wearing a scarf. The woman from earlier appears beside you like a spirit of mild disappointment. She snatches the bucket from your hands and peers into it. "You didn't spill it," she says, mildly surprised. You feel a small, irrational burst of pride. Then she adds, "Yet." She disappears into the smoky depths of the room again, leaving you standing at the threshold, unsure whether to follow or run into the woods and start a new life with the pigs. A small boy tugs on your tunic. "You're the one who dropped the leech bucket last week, right?" You shake your head too quickly. He nods solemnly. "It's okay. Everyone ruins something their first week. I fed the priest chalk once." You nod slowly, which seems to be your main contribution to society now. The boy pats your arm and walks away with the kind of world-weary gait only someone under 10 and burdened by too many chores can manage. You're still not entirely sure what your job is, who you're working for, or whether this is a paid position or some sort of elaborate punishment. But the bucket's delivered, no one's yelling, and the chicken winked at you. So, that's something. You stare at the pile of damp sticks like it owes you money. Smoke rises, but only the kind that signals failure and possibly mold. The fire is not just dead, it never lived. It never even tried. The flint in your hand is chipped. Your fingers are numb, and your confidence drips away like rain through a hole in the roof you didn't know you had until last night's storm introduced itself through your skull. The kindling hisses at you, not in a metaphorical way. It actually hisses, like it's offended by the suggestion of combustion. You poke it again, as if that will change anything. The straw you scavenged from the goat pen is suspiciously spongy and smells like it spent some time in the wrong kind of puddle. You try to convince yourself it's just damp, deeply, soulfully damp. Definitely not something worse. An old man passes by the door, hears your muttered curses, and peers in like a disappointed god. He says nothing, just exhales, long and slow. The sound alone causes your fragile stack of twigs to collapse like a noble idea in a council meeting. You nod at him, hoping for advice, mentorship, a hint of wisdom. He just shakes his head, mutters something about youth and hubris, and continues down the path with the urgency of a man late to an appointment with absolutely nothing. You crouch again and try the flint. Sparks dance like tiny betrayals, landing on the straw with all the heat of a guilty thought. Nothing catches. You try blowing on it gently, then not so gently, then aggressively, until you're lightheaded and questioning whether you're helping or just slowly roasting your own face. A neighbor woman appears, arms crossed, eyebrows already judging you from 3 paces out. "Did you dry the straw first?" she asks. You hadn't. Of course you hadn't. She snorts, tosses something at you, a bundle wrapped in cloth, and disappears before you can thank or accuse her. You unwrap it. Dry moss, sweet-smelling, and smug. You rearrange your little fire pile, carefully this time, like a puzzle or a curse, and tuck the moss into the center like it's a secret. The flint strikes again. A spark lands. The moss flares. For exactly half a second. Then everything goes out in a sad little fizzle, as though the fire briefly considered existing and politely declined. You sit back, inhaling the smoky aftermath. Your hands are blackened, your knees are muddy, and you're beginning to suspect this whole survival thing was invented by people who had more free time and fewer chickens in their walls. A goose honks from somewhere too close. You don't look up. You already know it's staring. At some point, the village's semi-official goat wanders in. You think his name is Tooth. No one really knows. He chews on one of your fire sticks while maintaining uncomfortable eye contact. You let him. You're too tired to fight a goat with that level of commitment. A child appears, barefoot and sticky with something unidentifiable. My uncle uses honey, she says. For what? Fire, or boils, sometimes both. He says it teaches the flame respect. You thank her. She curtsies, trips over your foot, and scampers off giggling. You consider using honey. You consider throwing the entire hut into the fire pit and calling it a controlled burn. Instead, you sit very still and wonder how much body heat one person can generate by sheer will alone. Eventually, you try again, slowly, patiently, like someone trying not to insult the gods of combustion. The moss lights. You don't breathe. The twigs catch. A flame, small and trembling, curls upward like a secret finally told. You whisper encouragements. The fire grows. Not much, but enough to pretend you're not completely incompetent. The goat snorts approvingly. The straw crackles. Smoke drifts through the cracks in the roof and out into the morning like a victory flag made of ash. You hold your hands near it, close but not too close, remembering last time, when you roasted your knuckles and earned the respect of exactly no one. The warmth is meager, like the memory of a bath, but it's there. You feed it another stick, tenderly, like offering a gift to a sleeping dragon. It stays lit. Your back aches, your knees crack. You smell like a chimney that got into a fight with a swamp. But for the first time today, something actually works. Not well, not confidently, but it works. And that's more than you could say about most things this week. The porridge looks at you first. Not literally, but there's a moment of mutual awareness between you and the bowl that suggests sentience. It glistens, thick and lumpy, the color of beige after it's given up on having a personality. A bubble forms near the edge, swells ominously, and bursts with a quiet plop that feels too deliberate. You raise your spoon, hand-carved, slightly splintered, suspiciously sticky, and stir. The porridge doesn't resist, exactly, but it does shift, like it's thinking about it. Across the table, a boy with one eyebrow and half a sock is already halfway through his bowl, chewing with the mechanical resignation of someone who gave up on flavor 3 seasons ago. He glances at you, shrugs, and goes back to work on a particularly chewy clump with the enthusiasm of a goat chewing a shoe. You take a bite. It's warm, vaguely grain-like, and spiced, though the spice seems to be bitterness and confusion. There's something crunchy in it, something sour, and something that might have once been fruit, if fruit had been cursed and buried for a fortnight. Still, it's food, or close enough. You chew, trying not to make eye contact with the porridge as it slowly reclaims the indentation your spoon left behind. Someone passes behind you and pats your shoulder. Good batch today, they say, which is either a compliment or a warning. You can't tell. A woman sits at the next bench over and sprinkles something into her bowl from a pouch on her belt. It smells like dried onion and broken dreams. She catches you staring and offers you a pinch. You nod thanks, add it in, and immediately realize it does not improve the situation. Now it tastes like defeat and onion. You try a second bite, hoping the first was just unlucky. It wasn't. The porridge gets thicker the more you stir it. You're pretty sure that's the opposite of how food is supposed to work. You turn your spoon upside down, and it clings to it like a frightened animal. The man across from you is adding what appears to be a cube of dried meat. He bites into it, and it makes a sound like someone stepping on a beetle. You ask what kind of meat it is. He shrugs and says, "Maybe goat." You ask what it actually is. He shrugs again and says, "Still maybe goat." Someone near the hearth drops their bowl. It lands with a thud instead of a splash. Everyone pauses for a moment. The cook looks up from the cauldron with a stare that could flatten crops and mutters something that sounds vaguely threatening but is drowned out by the scraping of spoons. The porridge is starting to solidify now. Your third bite stands upright without assistance. You wonder if you can barter with it, maybe trade it for a clean sock, or half a fish, or a slightly less ominous bowl of porridge from last week. You glance at the doorway. The goat from yesterday is watching you again. He blinks, slowly, like he knows something. You blink back. He leaves. You feel judged. The boy next to you finishes his bowl, sighs like someone completing a tax form, and announces, "Good glue today." You laugh. He doesn't. The silence is long enough to become spiritual. You look back into your bowl. The surface has begun to crust, forming a skin so firm it resists your spoon like it's got opinions. You break through and finish the last of it, grimacing as you swallow. It tastes like oats, sorrow, and one mystery nut that probably wasn't supposed to be there. When the bowl is empty, you feel no joy, no relief, just a kind of grim satisfaction that at least you didn't let it win. You place your spoon down with the finality of a knight sheathing his sword. The cook nods at you once from across the room, then goes back to stirring the next batch with a ladle the size of a child's leg. Outside, the morning is already awake and doing its best to pretend the sun isn't late. You stand slowly, stomach uncertain, and prepare yourself for whatever task they've decided you're responsible for today. Someone yells about the well rope again. Someone else throws a cabbage at a crow. The day begins, full of noise, mud, and mild digestive distress. You survived breakfast. Somehow, that feels like progress. The bucket is heavier than it should be, and no one explains why it smells like turnips and disappointment. They just hand it to you with a nod and a vague gesture toward the well at the edge of the village, past the goat pen, the leaning fence, and a patch of mud that's more personality than terrain. You cradle it in both arms like it might detonate and start walking, the chill morning air slapping your face like it heard what you said about spring yesterday. The well is older than reason. Its stones sag inward like it's trying to curl up and nap forever, and the winch groans before you even touch it, as if preemptively tired of your nonsense. The rope hanging from the pulley is frayed in exactly the way ropes shouldn't be. You touch it gently, like it's a sleeping beast or a poorly made cake. A soft squeal issues from the mechanism. It's unclear whether that's the wood or your dignity. You lower the bucket, slow and steady, muscles tense like the rope might unravel out of spite. Halfway down, a sudden tug nearly jerks it from your hands. You freeze, listening. Nothing, just the echo of water and something that might be muttering. You squint down the shaft, trying to see the bottom, but it's all shadow and silence. You jiggle the rope a little. It resists, and then you hear it, flapping. You look up just in time for the duck to round the corner. It is small, irate, and waddling with violent purpose. You've never seen a bird with a grudge, but this one clearly remembers a slight that happened generations ago and has decided you're the next installment in its vendetta. It honks once, loud and furious, then launches itself at your legs. The rope jerks. You lose your balance, stagger, and grab the side of the well with one hand, while the other holds the rope like your life depends on it, which, unfortunately, it might. The duck circles, pecking at your boots with clinical precision. You attempt to reason with it. This fails. The rope slips a little more. You shout something that sounds brave in your head, but comes out like a squeaky threat. The duck, unimpressed, flaps onto a nearby barrel and resumes its watch, glaring like it's writing a bad review of your entire existence. With a breath, you pull the rope back up, hand over hand, the bucket swaying and dripping just enough to hit your feet with icy splashes. Your fingers burn, your shoulders ache, and the pulley whines like you've asked it for one favor too many. At last, the bucket crests the well rim, half full of water and something that might be a twig or a very thin worm. You don't ask questions. You set the bucket down, breathing hard, and inspect the haul. It's clean enough, which is a low bar, but it clears it. The duck hops down and waddles closer again. You keep a wary eye on it as you lift the bucket. It watches. You back away. It follows. The walk back is slower, tenser, a bizarre dance between man, water, and waterfowl. Halfway back, the bottom of the bucket gives a groan. You pause. A slow leak has begun from a crack near the seam, dripping a steady rhythm onto the mud. You try to tilt it just right, to keep most of it in, but your arms are starting to shake. The village is still far enough that you can hear the church bell, but not close enough to throw the bucket and call it a lesson. By the time you reach the door, the bucket is lighter than it should be, and your boots are wetter than anyone has a right to be at this hour. You hand it off to a passing woman who glances inside and says, "Could be worse." You're not sure how, but you nod anyway. Someone hands you a cloth. You assume it's to dry your hands. It turns out to be your next chore. The duck watches from a fence post as you head back toward the field, soggy, sore, and somehow victorious. You survived the well. You got the water. You may never trust poultry again, but that feels like a reasonable trade. You begin the morning by losing an argument with your shirt. It's made of rough spun wool that feels like it was woven from the beard of a disgruntled badger and then blessed by a priest whose only spell was mild discomfort. Pulling it over your head requires both commitment and ispratum, a complete disregard for personal boundaries. You emerge from it victorious, but covered in what feels like half a hedge and a rash already forming somewhere under your collarbone. The second layer is moss. You don't ask why. You just accept the bundle you're handed by a girl with one shoe and a suspiciously sharp smile. The moss is dry, at least, and someone has thoughtfully sewn it onto a kind of netted tunic, the kind of fashion statement that says, "I live in the forest and have opinions about bark." You pull it on. It smells like peat, secrets, and something that once nested. Over that goes a cloak that doesn't belong to you. You know this because it's too big, smells faintly of pipe smoke and onions, and the clasp has a carved emblem shaped like a goat in mid-scream. It might be ceremonial, or cursed, or both. No one clarifies. They just nod at you and say, "Good winter fashion," like they're complimenting your sense of survival. You shuffle outside, layered in what can only be described as damp warmth and social exile. Your arms don't bend the way they used to. Turning your head involves commitment. Birds in the trees stop singing when they see you. A small child gasps and runs to tell someone that the swamp man is awake. The wind hits you in the face like a sack of frozen cabbages, and you immediately understand why layering is a necessity. Beneath the cloak and moss and emotional damage, there's a fragile sliver of warmth that clings to your chest like a frightened mouse. You huddle into it and keep walking, the ground crunching underfoot, the sky hanging low and gray like it's still deciding whether or not to snow. You pass a man chopping wood with his sleeves rolled up and exactly zero signs of sanity. He nods once, grunts something about layers being for the weak, and returns to his log like it personally offended his lineage. You don't stop to explain your outfit. You just keep walking, hoping the creaking sounds you're hearing are the cloak and not your spine giving up. A dog trots past you, stops, sniffs the hem of your moss tunic, and recoils visibly. It sneezes once and bounds away with the kind of energy you haven't felt since before you discovered what wool socks and damp boots feel like. You try to follow its optimism with your eyes, but the collar of your cloak prevents anything beyond mild glancing. Your task today involves gathering firewood, which is unfortunate, as your arms now function like two disgruntled broomsticks. Every time you bend over, something tugs, something scratches, and something inside your sleeve shifts with a texture that might be lichen. You mutter to yourself for company and pick up sticks like you're trying not to alarm them. The pile in your arms grows slowly, unevenly, mostly twigs, and one suspiciously heavy branch that might still be alive. Someone nearby calls out that your look is coming together. You don't respond. You can't. Your tongue is frozen, and your dignity is somewhere under the third layer of moss. Another villager walks past, dressed in furs that clearly once had ambition, and offers you a knowing smile. "First winter?" they ask. You nod. "It gets worse," they add helpfully. By midday, your clothing is starting to settle, adjusting to your body like a resentful roommate. The itch has dulled to a background hum. You've stopped noticing the smell, unless you move too quickly or stand near heat. And your fingers, though numb, are still attached, which you're told is a seasonal victory. Back at the hearth, someone ladles stew into a cracked bowl and hands it to you without comment. You sit by the fire, the layers steaming gently, looking less like a person and more like something pulled from a peat bog for study. Across the room, the duck watches you again. Its gaze says, "You're adapting." Your bowl is warm, your clothes are dry enough, and your skin hasn't fallen off. For winter fashion, that's practically couture. You're sent to the edge of the village with instructions that include, "Be respectful," "Don't touch the red bottles," and "If she offers you soup, say no." It's not exactly reassuring, especially the last part. But apparently, the herbalist is the only one who knows how to treat the rash you're pretending you don't have and identify the mushrooms you're definitely planning to eat later. Her hut appears as a series of increasingly aggressive smells before you even see it. There's smoke, something like mint if it had anxiety, and a sharp, sour tang that might be vinegar or bad decisions. The door creaks open before you knock. A hand knotted, veiny, and covered in something green waves you inside. You enter cautiously, ducking under bundles of drying herbs that hang from the rafters like leafy chandeliers. Jars line every surface, filled with things that float ominously or stare back. The walls are covered in drawings, most of which involve body parts, moons, or animals that might not exist anymore. The herbalist is smaller than expected, not hunched, exactly, just compressed by time and knowing too much. She's wearing a robe made of layers that probably used to be curtains, feathers, or possibly small rugs. Her hair is a white cloud that defies gravity and reason. She smiles at you, revealing a perfect absence of teeth. "You look like you itch," she says, not unkindly. You open your mouth to respond, but she's already rummaging through a box labeled "Do Not Touch" in shaky handwriting. She mutters as she digs mostly about weather, sin, and a goat named Pelvis. You nod as if this helps. She emerges with a root the size of your fist and the color of old betrayal. It smells like feet. More specifically, like the feet of someone who's been walking through fermented cabbage in emotional distress. You take it with both hands and a forced smile. She nods like she's just handed you a family heirloom or a live grenade. "Boil it," she says, "but don't drink it on Tuesdays." You blink. "Why not Tuesdays?" "Boil." She leans in so close her breath fogs your soul and whispers. That's when they listen. You're not sure who they are, but you're now certain you don't want to find out. You nod with the solemnity of someone accepting a burden they can neither refuse nor comprehend. She winks, then giggles, then coughs, then spits into a jar labeled lung stuff. You try not to look at it too long. As you're backing toward the door, she grabs your sleeve. Her grip is stronger than it should be. Her eyes sparkle in a way that makes your stomach think about running. "One more thing," she says. "If the root screams, don't answer." You nod again, because that's all you know how to do anymore. She lets go and turns back to her cauldron, which burps once and emits a green puff of something that smells like hot lettuce. You step outside into the crisp air and instantly feel like you've been released from a dream that involved too many textures. The root is still in your hands. It pulses faintly. Probably just your imagination. Probably. You return to the village, where no one asks how it went. They just see the root, make various faces, and step aside. Someone mumbles, "Hope it's not Tuesday," and keeps walking. Back in your hut, you set the root on the table and light a candle. It casts long shadows that move too much for comfort. You stare at it. It stares back. "Boil it," she said. "Don't drink it on Tuesdays. If it screams, don't answer." You take a deep breath, reach for your pot, and begin, because apparently this is your life now. And the root still smells like feet. You wake up to wind in your face and the distinct feeling that something has crawled into your boot and died out of spite. The lean-to creaks overhead, which is impressive, considering how little structure it has to begin with. One wall has collapsed in the night, possibly under the weight of a falling twig or a strong opinion. The other walls are still standing, if you define standing as leaning on each other for moral support and barely functioning as a concept. You sit up, brush frost off your blanket, which is just a burlap sack, with trust issues, and decide today is the day you improve your shelter. Not because you're ready, but because you're cold, and there's a damp patch forming under your elbow that feels like the beginning of a life-altering illness. You begin by collecting more sticks, not just any sticks, structural sticks. You try knocking a few against a rock to test their resolve. One breaks immediately, one bends and stays bent, like it's mocking you. The third looks solid, so you keep it and pretend the testing was intentional. Soon you've gathered an impressive pile of questionable lumber, most of which is already damp and covered in some sort of moss you choose to believe is friendly. As you return to the lean-to, you catch movement out of the corner of your eye. A goat, just standing there, staring at you like he's your landlord and you're late on rent. You nod at him. He blinks slowly. You name him Mort. Mort watches as you begin construction, which involves leaning the new sticks against the existing ones and patting them in a way that implies stability. You talk to the shelter as you work, not because you think it helps, but because you need the moral support. "You've got this," you say. "Look at you, practically a cottage." The wind howls through a fresh gap in the roof. "That's just natural ventilation," you add. Mort chews on something invisible and does not look impressed. You try adding a second layer of sticks, then wedge some branches across the top in what can only be described as interpretive thatching. The result is less insulated hideaway and more twig sculpture grieving its choices. Still, you step back, hands on, hips, and admire your work like you haven't just built a highly flammable sadness tent. A neighbor passes by with a bundle of firewood and glances at your lean-to. "Looks sturdy," they say, then immediately trip over a root and nearly throw their back out. You take it as a compliment anyway. You line the inside walls with leaves for extra insulation. They're damp, and a few of them crawl slightly, but they stick, mostly. You place your burlap sack back inside, fluff it with a rock, and crawl under the slope of the new wall to test your improvements. A stick snaps above you. You do not move. You lie there, staring at the slanting roof inches from your nose, smelling mildew and faint goat. The wind pushes against the outside wall and it holds, kind of, except for the part that creaks like it's making threats in another language. You imagine snow piling on top, then a heavier goat, then snow and a goat. You try not to think about it. You crawl back out, re-angle a support beam, and yell, "You're doing great," directly at the wall. Mort sneezes. By dusk, your lean-to looks exactly like it did before, only more nervous. But it hasn't fallen over again, which technically counts as progress. You sit near the entrance, wrapped in your mossy layers, sipping broth that tastes like boiled disappointment and staring at Mort, who still hasn't left. The wind dies down. The fire crackles. Your lean-to remains upright. It's not a house. It's not even a shack. But it's yours. And for tonight, that's enough. The shovel is handed to you without ceremony, like a prophecy fulfilled by accident. The man who gives it is missing an eyebrow and most of his sense of urgency. He gestures toward an empty patch of dirt between two crooked trees and says, "There." You ask, "What am I digging?" And he shrugs so hard it looks like his shoulders are trying to evacuate the conversation. Then he walks away. So you stand there, holding a shovel that weighs more than your dignity, staring at the ground like it owes you money. There are no markings, no flags, no signs of previous holes or future intentions, just dirt and silence. Except for the occasional cluck of a chicken that sounds vaguely threatening, you test the shovel. It's sharp in the wrong places and splintered in the handle, but it fits in your hands like a bad idea you've already committed to. You jab it into the earth and lean your weight on it. The dirt resists, offended. You press harder, the blade slips, and you nearly tumble forward into a very judgmental bush. Behind you, someone snorts. You adjust, reset, try again. This time, the shovel sinks a few inches with a sound that is not quite satisfying. You scoop the dirt out, set it aside, and repeat. The ground is packed, full of roots and rocks, and a history that clearly doesn't want to be disturbed. You keep digging anyway, mostly because you don't know what else to do, and partially because someone might be watching. After the fourth scoop, something squishes. You freeze. It's not a normal squish, not like mud or wet leaves. This one has personality, the kind of squish that suggests you've interrupted something that was not ready to be involved in your morning. You lean down slowly, peer into the shallow pit, and see nothing. Just more dirt. Maybe something gelatinous. Maybe just a weird worm. You poke it with the shovel. It jiggles. You stop poking. Then, from behind you, applause. You turn. A small crowd has gathered. 6 people and a goat, all clapping. No one explains why. An old woman smiles at you like you've just passed a sacred test. A boy points and whispers, "It moved." The man who gave you the shovel nods approvingly. "That's good dirt," he says. "You found it." You try to ask what it is, but you're shushed by a man with a beard like a hedge. He places a hand on your shoulder and says, "We've been waiting for the digger." You open your mouth to correct him, to explain this was not an intentional identity shift, but someone hands you a second shovel. It's slightly smaller, equally splintered, a ceremonial one maybe, or just another broken tool they didn't want to throw out. You accept it, because now they're chanting, softly, in rhythm. "Digger, digger, digger," like it's a lullaby sung by cultists who garden on the weekends. You turn back to the pit. The squishy patch has vanished, reabsorbed, denied. You take another scoop and nothing happens. The chanting continues. Someone starts humming. A child brings you a boiled root wrapped in cloth, your first payment as a tradesperson. You have become a professional. By noon, the hole is deep enough to stand in. No one has told you to stop. A woman with 2 braids and 1 boot occasionally tosses you a canteen and offers vague encouragement like, "Yes, yes, just like that." And the ancestors are probably fine with this. You have dirt in your ears, on your tongue, and in parts of your clothing you didn't know had openings. But there's something calming about the repetition, the rhythm, the soft squelch of slightly too wet earth. You dig, you listen, you try not to think about the squish. At some point, Mort the goat appears at the edge of the pit. He stares down at you, blinks, and wanders off like he expected more. You keep going, not because you believe in the hole, but because the villagers do. And now, apparently, so do you. Dinner is served with a level of excitement usually reserved for weddings or the sudden return of goats that wandered off 3 seasons ago. A woman with a ladle and permanent squint gestures for you to sit on a stump that may or may not be composting. You oblige, because you're cold, tired, and half convinced that refusing food here qualifies as an act of war. She hands you a bowl. It's wooden, slightly cracked, and has been stained by so many past meals it now resembles tree bark that holds secrets. Which is ironic, because what's inside is bark. Bark, moss, and something green that wiggles just enough to make your stomach nervous. She calls it the good weeds, and you nod like you've heard of them, as if they're an herb with a noble lineage instead of something she definitely scraped off a rock. The whole concoction smells like boiled memory foam and looks worse. Still, you smile. You're learning that meals here are less about taste and more about not dying. So you brace yourself, raise the spoon, and take the first bite. It crunches. You weren't expecting crunch. It's the bark. It's been boiled. Twice, she says proudly, which apparently qualifies as tender in this postal code. You chew slowly, trying to find flavor like it's hidden in there somewhere, waiting to surprise you. But the only thing that surprises you is how long it takes to chew one mouthful. The bark doesn't break down so much as it resists. Actively, you smile again. Your jaw pops. The moss, at least, is soft. Kind of. It has a texture you'd describe as regretful sponge, and a taste that feels like what dirt would remember after its feelings got hurt. Still, it slides down easier than the bark, so you move to it like it's dessert. Then come the weeds. They're technically green, which is encouraging, but they carry the bitter bite of something that was never meant to be food, but gave in under peer pressure. You nod as the woman watches, spoon halfway to her lips. She looks at you with genuine anticipation, like she's hoping you'll say it's the best thing you've ever eaten, and she can finally sleep at night. You say, "It's hearty." She beams. A man beside you offers a thick slice of something flat and gray. Tree bread, he explains. You don't ask what kind of tree. You just take it and pretend chewing is a sign of appreciation rather than desperation. It has the texture of felt and the flavor of not much, possibly less than not much. If nothingness had a cousin who was shy, it would be this bread. Around the fire, others eat happily, loudly. One man hums as he gnaws on something that bends. A child licks bark like it's a lollipop. Mort the goat sidles up next to you and eyes your bowl with suspicion. He sniffs once, huffs, and walks away. You stare into your bowl, plot a quiet uprising against the concept of seasoning. Imagine raiding the next caravan that comes through, not for gold or tools, but for salt, or onions, or anything that once knew flavor. Still, you finish it, because it's warm, and it fills the aching spot just below your ribs, and everyone here is watching with the wide-eyed reverence of people who still believe in dinner as a spiritual act. A woman pats your back and says you eat like a real villager now, which sounds like praise, even if your tongue feels like it's aged 15 years. Later, as the bowl is taken and refilled for someone else, you lean back and stare at the fire. It cracks gently, sparks dancing, into the dark. You've eaten worse. Probably. You just can't remember when. But at least you're not hungry anymore. Just deeply suspicious of trees. Bathing, they say, is important. Not for health, not for smell, but for something they call inner balance, which feels suspiciously like an excuse. You're told it's your turn. Handed a wooden bucket filled with water that looks clear, but smells like an old root cellar, and pointed toward a structure they generously call the bathhouse. It's more of a shed, a leaning one, with gaps between the boards that let in drafts and small animals, a place where privacy goes to die. Inside, it's colder than expected. You were hoping for steam or warmth or even an encouraging candle. Instead, there's just the bucket, a bench, and a rag hanging from a nail. The rag looks clean in the sense that it's been boiled repeatedly into something resembling compliance. It's damp, possibly self-aware. You give it a cautious poke and it shifts, just enough to make you doubt your life. There's also a bar of soap. At least, you think it's soap. It's square, hard, and smells like it once had a purpose. You scrape a bit off with your thumbnail and it flakes like old cheese. Still, you're not about to question the process. You've already been introduced to bark stew and squishy dirt. This feels par for the course. You peel off your layers. The cold slaps your skin like it's been waiting for this moment. Each article of clothing removed releases a puff of air that smells like firewood, moss, and mild existential crisis. By the time you're down to skin, you've lost feeling in most of your limbs and started bargaining with the air. You dunk the rag. The water is not just cold, it's aggressively cold. It has opinions. As it drips down your back, it sends a message straight to your spine that says, "You've made mistakes." You scrub anyway, focusing on your arms, chest, and any parts that seem to have developed their own climate. The rag is coarse, not quite fabric, not quite sandpaper. It exfoliates both skin and memory. Halfway through, something inside the bucket moves. It's small, quick, a flicker under the surface, like a tadpole or a cursed pearl. You pause, peer into the water. Nothing, just ripples and the soft reflection of your own hollow stare. You debate whether to finish the bath or surrender to the dirt. Then the door creaks open and an old man leans in to remind you, cheerfully, that your time is almost up. You scrub faster. By the end, your skin is red, your fingers are pruned, and you smell vaguely of wet rock and pine disappointment. You towel off with a piece of linen that's more suggestion than fabric, get dressed in clothes that feel damp even when dry, and step out into the cold air feeling something. Not cleaner, exactly, but less haunted by the weight of sweat and bark stew. The village children run past, laughing, one of them holding the rag aloft, like a banner. You hope they're not using it for crafts. The woman who assigned you the bath nods once and tells you your aura looks less crusty. You take that as a compliment. Later, back in your lean-to, you curl into your sack of warmth and scratch at your shoulder, where the soap left a patch of mystery. Mort watches from his usual spot, chewing on something you're fairly certain was once part of your shoe. You sigh, shift deeper into your moss-lined nest, and try not to think about the thing in the bucket. You're not sure if you're cleaner, but you survived, which, around here, is basically enlightenment. The fire has long since gone out, leaving your lean-to filled with the kind of darkness that feels thick, the kind that leans in, whispers in your ear, and asks if you remembered to secure the door, which you didn't, because the door is just a flap of wool that's more whole than fabric now, draped across the opening like a sad curtain in a forgotten theater. You lie still, wrapped in a blanket that smells vaguely of goat and choices made under duress, and stare into the black. The cold has fingers. It taps along your spine, prodding between layers, curling into your socks like it pays rent. Then it begins. The rustling. It's faint at first. Just a scrape, a shuffle, the whisper of something moving through brittle leaves. You tell yourself it's the wind. Maybe Mort. Maybe the wind riding Mort, if the universe wants to be particularly creative tonight. But then it gets closer. There's a very specific sound that dry twigs make when something steps on them. Not breaks them, presses on them. Weighty, intentional. You freeze beneath your blanket, ears straining, eyes wide. The rustling stops, then starts again, louder this time, circling. It could be a raccoon, a very ambitious one, or a large owl with personal grievances. It could be anything, really, if you're being reasonable. But then you remember Dave. Dave was once an apprentice, cobbler who decided, one particularly aggressive spring, that civilization was a trap. He left the village with nothing but a sack of boiled beans and the conviction of a man who had recently read half a book. He said he would commune with the soil and hear the secrets of the trees. He was gone for a week. When he came back, his eyes were too wide and he wouldn't eat bread anymore. Now he just stares at things too long and mutters about the silent hours. You once heard him scold a fern. You pull your blanket up to your nose and listen harder. The sound has stopped again, replaced by a silence so absolute it hums. That's the worst part. The waiting. The moment between moments where you start to think maybe it was nothing. Maybe it's over. Then the whisper comes. It's not words. Not really. Just breath. Near your door. Something exhaling in your direction. You consider calling out. Maybe saying, "Hello?" like people do in stories. Even though it never helps. But your throat locks up, and all you manage is a wheeze that sounds like a squirrel sighing. Then the wool flap shifts. A shadow leans in. Not enters, just peers. You catch the glint of eyes, too high for a raccoon, too low for a bear, too Dave-shaped. You whisper, "Dave?" There's a long pause. The shadow sways. Then softly a voice. They're whispering again. You don't move. Partly from fear, mostly because you don't want to make whatever this is feel invited. They say the moss is watching, Dave says. Tell it I said hello. You do not respond. The flap falls back into place. Footsteps recede, slow and crunching, as Dave or something shaped like him wanders off into the night again, humming a song you hope never existed before now. You lie awake for a long time, listening for rustling, for whispers, for the sound of moss saying hello. Eventually, sleep finds you, curled tight and breathing shallow, not because the danger is gone, but because you know now that it might never leave. Morning breath here doesn't just linger, it announces itself like a town crier. You wake up with a mouth that feels like it's been colonized by moss and betrayal, and no amount of polite optimism is going to fix that. Someone once mentioned tooth maintenance around the communal fire, and the herbalist cackled so hard she dropped her root bundle into the stew. Today, they hand you a stick. It is whittled at one end and charred at the other. You are told it is for brushing. They say it like this is obvious. You stare at it the way one might stare at a tool whose function has clearly been lost to time or madness. An old man with one tooth left side, upper row, shows you how it's done. He dips the charred end into a bowl of cold ashes and scrubs his mouth with enthusiasm and no clear technique. He then gestures for you to do the same, looking proud, like he's passing on a sacred rite. You dip your stick. The ash clings to the wood in soft, powdery clumps, and you raise it to your mouth with the hesitation of someone about to make a terrible culinary decision. You scrub gently. The texture is what you'd expect if sandpaper and burnt oatmeal had a child and then abandoned it. Your gums do not enjoy this. Neither does your tongue, which recoils and tries to detach entirely from the situation. You keep going because everyone is watching, because now you're the one with the sacred stick, and you're committed. A minute in, your mouth tastes like campfire and lost dreams. Your gums begin to bleed not dramatically, but enough to raise questions in a modern dentist's office. Here, it's met with a nod of approval and a small round of claps from a group of children who have somehow materialized to observe your suffering. One girl points and says, "That means it's working." You smile politely and try not to die. The bleeding continues. You rinse with cold water, or what passes for water. It's slightly green and smells faintly of bark and maybe goat. You spit discreetly behind a bush, where the goat is watching. He blinks once and turns away, clearly disappointed in your technique. The ash doesn't go away completely. It lingers in the crevices, on your lips, in your soul. Your mouth now tastes both cleaner and somehow angrier, like it's unsure if it was just punished or praised. The old man nods again and says, "You've started the journey." You don't ask what that means. You've learned not to. For the rest of the day, everything you eat tastes slightly smoky and gritty. You chew with caution, aware of every tooth like each one is a small, angry roommate. A woman offers you a strip of dried root for gum vigor, which you accept and immediately regret. It tastes like old boots and has the texture of a rope that's seen things. You chew it anyway, because apparently this is wellness now. Later, you catch your reflection in a puddle. Your teeth are not whiter, not yet, but they are grayer, different. You smile, not because it looks good, but because you survived the ritual and now carry a stick in your belt that tells the world you brush, barbarian style. And that, somehow, is enough. At least until tomorrow, when you'll be expected to do it all over again. With less bleeding this time, hopefully, but no promises. The village has begun to buzz with the quiet urgency of animals that know the snow is coming, but haven't emotionally processed it. There's no calendar here, no official first day of winter, just a slow shift in the air and the way people start hoarding things: wood, root vegetables, mild paranoia. You wake up to the sound of someone shouting about turnips, not in a concerning way, just with passion, as if the turnips have offended them. When you step outside, the entire village is in motion. Bundles are being carried. Smoke pours from chimneys. Someone is digging furiously with both hands, muttering about the good dirt, while throwing out clumps that look identical to the bad dirt. You are handed a basket. It contains several jars. The contents are indistinct and vaguely gelatinous, in a palette that ranges from damp rust to malicious plum. You're told these are preserves, which sounds comforting until someone winks and says, "They're better after a few years." You do not ask how many years have already passed. Inside the main longhouse, shelves have been cleared for winter storage. Jars clink as they're lined up in rows like troops preparing for battle. Some are labeled with confident but unreadable scribbles. Others are unmarked and hum quietly, if shaken. You help stack them carefully, pretending not to notice the one that oozes slightly at the rim. An elderly woman with a braid longer than your arm offers you a wooden spoon. "Try this," she says with a pride that borders on threatening. You dip the spoon into a jar she holds reverently thick, green, and pulsing with seeds like it's still considering photosynthesis. She calls it swamp jam. You take a small bite and immediately question the chain of decisions that led you here. The flavor is layered. At first, it tastes like boiled spinach met a compost bin and fell in love. Then, it turns sweet in a way that feels accidental, like sugar wandered by and got trapped. There's a hint of alcohol, possibly vinegar, definitely betrayal. You smile, say it's complex. She beams and slaps your shoulder so hard you almost drop the jar. Outside, a group is stringing herbs along the eaves of the cottages. Some of the bundles smell pleasant mint, dried lavender, hints of pine. Others smell like feet. One of the children refers to them as ghost chasers. You nod solemnly, as if you too have chased ghosts and found them surprisingly herbal. Fermentation is happening everywhere. There are barrels half buried in the earth, gurgling softly, covered in blankets like they're recovering from something traumatic. Someone is pickling cabbage. Someone else is pickling things that do not look like cabbage. You stir one pot and are politely asked to stop before it activates too early. You don't press. At one point, a man with 2 fingers and a very confident mustache takes you aside and asks if you've seen the snow bones yet. You say no. He nods like, "That's good. Maybe, or maybe not." Then he offers you a flask. It smells like vinegar, tastes like fire, and makes your ears ring. He says it'll keep you warm until the screaming starts, then laughs like that's probably a joke. Probably. You're given a job sorting roots. There are more types of turnips than you ever imagined, and most of them seem to resent being touched. A purple one rolls away from you repeatedly. A yellow one makes your hands itch. You place them carefully in baskets and pretend to understand the system. You don't. No one does. Not even the woman barking. Instructions. She just gestures at piles and says, "Winter piles, not death piles." And you go with it. By nightfall, the village smells like smoke, brine, and distant mildew. Your hands are stained with beet juice and hope. Everyone gathers around the fire to eat fermented soup, which tastes like someone left it behind on purpose, but it found its way back anyway. There is bread, dense enough to use as a foundation stone, and someone passes around dried fruit that crunches instead of chews. You eat it all, because this is winter prep, and you are part of it now. Tomorrow, someone says, you'll help with the wool wrapping. You don't ask what that means. You just nod and sip your swamp jam tea and stare into the fire like it's going to explain things. It doesn't, but it crackles warmly, and that's enough. For now. You've seen bartering before. Fish for bread, boots for chickens, a half-decent joke for a warm place near the fire. But today, things shift. Today, you're introduced to a new economy. A quieter one, fuzzier too. It begins when you lose a mitten. To be fair, it wasn't much of a mitten to begin with, more of a patch with aspirations. But it kept your left hand from turning into a claw, and now it's gone. Whisked away during morning chores, maybe caught on a branch, maybe stolen by a passing breeze with boundary issues. You search for it for a while, muttering under your breath and threatening nearby bushes, but the mitten does not return. Then you see the squirrel. It's perched on a crooked fence post like it owns stock in the village. Its fur is too sleek, its eyes are too aware, and in its tiny paws, it holds something suspiciously mitten-colored. You squint. It squints back. The standoff begins. You try approaching slowly, hands out, palms open like you're offering peace or snacks. The squirrel chitters. Not an angry sound, but not welcoming either. Just a small chiding noise like you've misunderstood your place in the food chain. The mitten is clearly chewed. You ask for it anyway. The squirrel tilts its head, and in that moment, you know two things. 1. This squirrel understands you. 2. It does not care. You reach forward and it darts back, vanishing into a nearby tree with a flick of its tail and what can only be described as smugness. You follow, because dignity is a luxury you traded for warmth days ago. After a few minutes of crashing through underbrush and apologizing to brambles, you arrive at what can only be described as a diplomatic summit. 4 squirrels, all watching, one holding a tiny pine cone like a gavel. You get the sense negotiations are possible. From your pocket, you produce an acorn. The squirrels perk up. One chitters excitedly. Another tries to act disinterested but visibly scoots closer. You place the acorn on a stump. They descend upon it like furry diplomats, examine it, taste it, and decide it's acceptable. You try to exchange it for the mitten. They decline. You add another acorn. The leader sniffs. Still no. 3 seems to be the magic number. The squirrel holding the mitten, now officially dubbed the glove keeper, drops it at your feet and scurries back into the trees with the others, who seem to argue briefly over distribution. You don't ask what the conversion rate is. You simply collect your prize. It's not your mitten. It's a glove, left-handed, thicker than yours, stitched with care, lined with something that might be fur or ambitious moss. You slip it on. It fits poorly. Your fingers bunch awkwardly, but it's warm, and the thumb works. Mostly. That's enough. Later, someone in the village sees it and raises an eyebrow. You shrug and say, "Squirrels." They nod, like this makes perfect sense. That afternoon, you try offering an acorn to a different squirrel. It throws a twig at you. You get the impression the market is volatile, but the glove stays. You wear it proudly, one hand perpetually warmer than the other, a symbol of your unlikely deal with woodland forces. That night, as the wind howls and the fire sputters low, you flex your left fingers and feel something close to pride, not because you bartered, but because you learned a new rule of survival. Sometimes you trade with people, sometimes you trade with squirrels. Either way, it's all economics. The ice groans like an old man trying to stand up too fast, which is not exactly encouraging when you're crouched on top of it with a dull knife and a borrowed sense of confidence. You've been told ice fishing is peaceful. meditative even. Something about connecting with nature and learning patience. But no one mentioned that the first step involves squatting in temperatures low enough to make your eyelashes freeze together, stabbing the earth like it owes you money. You start cutting. The knife is technically sharp, in the way a spoon is technically a boat if you're desperate enough. You hack at the ice with the grace of a sleep-deprived woodpecker. A man named Bran handed you the blade this morning with a nod and the phrase, "Don't lose a toe." You assumed it was a joke. Now you're less sure. Eventually, a hole appears. It's more oblong than circular and slightly slanted, like even your best efforts can't escape your personal sense of geometry. You peer in. The water below is black and still, like a secret waiting to ruin your day. You bait your line with something unidentifiable that smells like it died in multiple stages. You lower it in slowly, trying to appear competent in front of a passing goat. Mort, probably. He watches you like he's seen this go badly before. Minutes pass, then more. You wait. Your fingers stiffen. Your nose goes numb. Your soul begins to gently climb out of your body in protest. Then, movement. A tug. Subtle, then sharp. You jolt with excitement, yank the line, and lean forward just a little too eagerly. The ice cracks beneath your knee with a sound that translates roughly to, "You've made a mistake." Your foot slips. You reach out, and then you're in. There is no elegant way to fall into a freezing lake. You splash through the hole like an angry raccoon dropped from a tree. Cold hits you like a full body slap. Your lungs try to reverse course. Your limbs forget what they're for. You flail, sputter, curse every decision that led to this exact moment. Somewhere below, a fish watches you with the unimpressed eyes of a creature that has seen too many tourists. You scramble. The edge of the ice is slick and rude. Your glove peels off. Your fingers find a grip, then lose it. For a horrifying half-second, you consider that this might be it. You, memorialized forever as that one fool who tried to fish with enthusiasm and no plan. Then your knee catches a ridge. You heave yourself upward with a noise that's half grunt, half primal whimper. You flop out of the water like a sea lion that's been deeply betrayed. You lie flat on the ice, gasping, dripping, vibrating like a phone someone left on a cold countertop. You are wetter than you have ever been. And angrier, Bran appears at some point, chewing something and offering no help whatsoever. "You caught anything?" he asks, deadpan. You respond with a noise that could kill crops. He tosses you a cloak, which smells like mushrooms and unwashed ambition, and walks away muttering about how the fish-like bold moves. You sit there for a while, dripping into your boots, steam rising off your body like you've been partially boiled. The wind is merciless. The fish are silent. But you know, they laughed. Somewhere beneath the ice, they're still laughing. You stare down into the hole. A bubble rises, mocking you. A small part of you swears vengeance. Not dramatic vengeance, just the kind where you come back later with better tools and a new plan and catch one of them out of sheer spite. Eventually, you limp back to camp, soaking and crunchy. No one asks what happened. They just hand you a cup of something hot and refuse to make eye contact. Which is fair. You sip it. You plot. Because next time, you're bringing fire. Or at least a sharper spoon. The last piece of bread wasn't even good. It was more suggestion than substance. Dry and brittle like it had dreams of becoming a crouton but never found its calling. Still, it was yours. Hard-won and hoarded in a rag scrap tucked beneath a wobbling stool you now call your pantry. You had plans for that bread. Maybe toast it over the fire. Maybe just stare at it and pretend you still have standards. And then the rat takes it. You see only the blur of motion at first. A small shape, a blur of brown fur, a flash of tail. You blink, confused, and then glance under the stool. Gone. You freeze. The empty rag flutters slightly, like it's ashamed. The crust is gone. You experience emotions usually reserved for breakups and stubbed toes. There's a distinct sound in your throat, somewhere between a gasp and a whimper, followed by an out-loud declaration of betrayal. You'd like to believe you're above crying over a bread crust, but here you are. One tear, just the one. It falls with dignity. The next hour becomes a revenge montage. You dig through the lean-to, gather twine, fashion a rudimentary trap out of a bucket and what might once have been a shoe. Your fingers are numb, your patience thinner than the soup you were going to dip that bread into, and your heart cold with resolve. You bait the trap with a questionable root chip and a single, hopeful crumb. Then you wait. It doesn't take long. The rat returns with the kind of confidence that suggests this isn't its first burglary. It sniffs once, twice, and then clink. The trap drops. Caught. You stare at it. It stares back. Small, brown, twitchy-nosed, somehow smug. There's no fear in its eyes, only judgment. You hold the bucket up to examine your foe. It squeaks softly, not panicked, not angry, just disappointed in you. Something about that squeak makes your spine wilt a little. You were victorious. You should feel something close to pride. Instead, you feel like a schoolyard bully who just shoved someone half their size. The rat looks at you with a face that says, "Really? Over crust?" You let it go. You tell yourself it's the right thing to do, that survival doesn't have to mean losing your soul in a bucket trap. It scampers off into the underbrush without a backward glance, tail high, dignity somehow intact. You return to your corner, sit on the stool, hug your knees and breathe deeply, like you're releasing bitterness into the wind. 2 hours later, you hear rustling. You peek out, and there, as if summoned by the scent of moral weakness, are 3 more rats. Not just the original thief, but a full delegation. They move with purpose. One climbs up a pile of firewood. Another sniffs your sock. The original rat, yes, you recognize it. Don't ask how sits proudly in the lead, chewing something that looks disturbingly like your emergency soap. You shoo them. They scatter, but slowly, like they know you've lost the will to enforce boundaries. You're no longer a threat. You are a service. You sit back down, sighing so deeply your ribs pop. The wind whistles outside like it, too, is laughing. You tell yourself it's fine, that you didn't need the crust, that you're above fighting rodents for baked goods. But deep down, a part of you knows the truth. You've been out-hustled by a rat. And worse, you kind of admire it. It starts with a single flake. You watch it drift lazily from the sky, delicate, harmless, the kind of thing poets get sentimental about and artists paint onto greeting cards. You even smile at it, like it's nature's way of apologizing for yesterday's frozen porridge and today's missing left sock. Then another falls, and another, and then, like someone up there got a little overexcited with the flour sifter, it's coming down in thick, wet waves that stick to everything and carry the emotional weight of 1,000 judgmental grandmothers. Within the hour, the world is white, quiet, and deeply inconvenient. Your lean-to, which you've named the Fortress of Probably, was never built to survive this. It was more a collection of sticks held together by ambition and prayer than an actual structure. But you believed in it. You patched it, reinforced it with mud and optimism. You even yelled encouraging things at it. It collapses at 3:12 p.m. Precisely. You're inside when it happens, spooning a lukewarm turnip and trying to decide if your toes are technically still toes. There's a creak, a groan, and then the roof gives way with the grace of a tipsy cow. Snow dumps on you like it's personal. Your fire sputters out with an offended hiss. Everything goes dark and cold and slightly crunchy. You lie there for a moment under the remains of your dignity and pine sap roof, contemplating your life choices. The small chunk of snow slides down your collar and settles at your lower back like a cold accusation. Eventually, you crawl out. The goat watches from a distance, chewing smugly. You ignore him. You have work to do. You gather what's left of your structure. Snapped branches, a few intact bark shingles, the rock you used as a shelf/pillow. You mutter as you go. Not words exactly, just the universal sound of someone betrayed by gravity and their own confidence. You rebuild. It's not pretty. It never was. But this time you try harder. You dig deeper into the snow, make a foundation like the old man with one eye vaguely suggested. You stack the sticks at sharper angles, add bracing poles, tie everything with strips of fabric from a shirt you no longer claim. You sweat into your sleeves, sniffle dramatically, and whisper threats at passing clouds. For a moment, it stands. You step back, nod in grim satisfaction, and whisper, "We rise." It collapses again. This time, it doesn't even wait for the wind. It just gives up like a fainting goat. One corner folds, the roof bows, and the whole thing sinks into the snow like it's embarrassed to be seen with you. You don't scream, but only because your throat is frozen and your pride is on sabbatical. You sit in the snow beside the wreckage. Snowflakes land on your knees like they're trying to comfort you. They don't. Mort, the goat, approaches. He sniffs your boot, then licks your collapsed shelter as if to say, "This tastes like failure." You throw a stick in his general direction. He doesn't flinch. Eventually, you start again, because that's what survival is. Not the grand moments of triumph, but the quiet ones, where you're cold and tired and everything you built just betrayed you in front of livestock. You get up. You grab another stick. You build. Not better, necessarily, but again. And maybe, just maybe, this one will hold until morning. You didn't set out to change winter fashion. You were just trying not to sink knee-deep into the fresh snow every time you stepped outside to answer nature's call. There's only so much dignity one person can lose before something inside them quietly snaps, and yours went sometime around the third time you had to crawl out of a waist-high drift like a confused badger. So now you're staring at 2 bundles of firewood, a few strips of bark, and your own frozen socks, trying to convince yourself this is a good idea. You lash the kindling to your feet with twine you may or may not have stolen from a suspiciously quiet broom. The end result is rustic, lumpy, a little pointy on the left side, but functional maybe. You take a tentative step, half expecting the whole thing to burst into flames or collapse into splinters. It holds. You take another step, and suddenly you're floating. Not literally, of course. There's no levitation. But compared to your usual plunge and flail routine, this is the closest you've come to grace all. Winter. You slide across the surface like a log with dreams. It's not fast, and it's definitely not stylish, but it works. You're upright, mobile. The snow no longer mocks you with every step. You make it halfway to the stream before you realize someone is watching. Then 2 people, then a crowd. You don't know how word travels so fast in a village with no mail system and a communal toothbrush, but by the time you trudge back to camp, there's a circle of spectators waiting. You try to act casual, like this is completely normal footwear and not something that looks like you mugged a campfire. Then Bran claps. 1 person clapping is tolerable, 2 is fine. But when the entire group joins in like you just performed a one-man miracle, it becomes something else entirely. You're being celebrated, loudly, in public, with several goats watching. Someone shouts, "The Woodfoot." You freeze. It's unclear whether it's a compliment, an insult, or just something shouted by a man who's chewed 1 too many pine needles. But it sticks. They chant it now. "Woodfoot, Woodfoot." A child throws you a pine cone like it's a bouquet. An elder nods solemnly, as if you've fulfilled some prophecy. You try to object. You point at your feet and say, "This is not innovation. This is desperation wearing rope." They don't care. By sunset, someone has drawn a sketch of your boots on a piece of bark. Someone else has tied their own kindling bundles and is trying to moonwalk on the snow, which ends in mild injury and applause. You, meanwhile, are trying to unstrap your own feet, but the bark has frozen and the twine has fused with your sock. You hobble to your lean-to, now proudly decorated with a single twig standing upright like a flagpole. A tribute, apparently. You collapse inside, exhausted, the smell of pine permanently embedded in your nostrils. Outside, someone yells, "Long live the Woodfoot." You bury your face in your hands, because it's happened. Again. You tried to survive quietly, and somehow, now you're a legend. The fire in the center of the village crackles with the kind of enthusiasm that implies someone finally figured out how to stack wood correctly, which, given the number of previous collapses and one unfortunate singed beard, is a minor miracle. The pot hanging above it is enormous, blackened from years of use, dented in heroic places, and somehow always a little too close to tipping over. Tonight is soup night, which the villagers say like it's a sacred holiday and not a loosely organized culinary gamble. Everyone contributes something. That's the rule. One item per person, one item only. Doesn't matter what. A turnip, a bone, a sprig of something suspiciously fuzzy, it all goes in. No questions asked, no judgment passed, just a long communal stir and the shared hope that whatever's floating doesn't bite back. You approach with your offering, a small handful of dirt. Technically, it's more silt than soil collected from near the edge of the frozen stream, where the snow melted just enough to reveal something vaguely scoopable. You tried to find a root, or a bug, even a frozen berry, but nature offered you nothing except this clump of damp earth that smells faintly of worms and defeat. You drop it in like it's truffle shavings, slowly, with gravitas. It hits the surface with a dull plop and vanishes beneath a swirl of greenish something. A man stirs, a woman sniffs, no one screams. Someone says, earthy. You nod like that was the plan all along. You sit with the others on uneven logs and overturned buckets, your knees pulled close and your hands tucked under your armpits for warmth. The air smells of pine smoke, wet wool, and what you hope is cabbage. A few children run in circles that might be games or might be low-level hypothermia. The goat is here too, of course. Mort never misses soup night. He licks someone's mitten and chews the corner of a bench like he's trying to contribute spiritually. The pot bubbles ominously. Someone throws in a rind. Someone else adds a mysterious gray lump they claim is dried eel. Maybe. No one corrects them. A collective silence settles over the group like a heavy blanket made of poor choices and hunger. You wrap your cloak tighter around yourself, already bracing for what this meal is going to do to your insides. You hope the dirt at least neutralizes the eel. Finally, the elder with the ladle declares it done. No one asks what the criteria were. Maybe it's the smell. Maybe it's the way the soup seems to have stopped resisting. Either way, bowls are passed, ladles are dipped, and portions are distributed with an alarming level of eye contact and reverence. Your bowl is handed to you, steaming, sloshing, faintly vibrating. You look down. There are things in it, shapes. One is green and squishy, one is brown and pointy, the rest are abstract. The liquid is an indefinable color, like rust met, beige, and they got stuck halfway. It smells like all the seasons mashed together and left in a root cellar. You sip. It tastes, but not awful. Definitely not good. But there's warmth and a vague umami hum, and your stomach growls in approval before your brain can issue a proper warning. The texture is questionable, especially when something slides across your tongue that feels like lint-wrapped cartilage, but you swallow it anyway, because this is dinner, because this is survival, because you put dirt in it, and people clapped. Around you, the villagers eat with slow, satisfied motions. No one rushes, no one complains. It's quiet except for the occasional slurp and the soft, wet plop of something shifting in someone's bowl. You realize, sitting there under a low-hanging moon with a soup that might contain last week's mushrooms and this morning's bark, that this is oddly peaceful. There's something comforting in the shared weirdness, in the way no one flinches when a beetle surfaces or when someone declares their chunk of meat might actually be petrified tofu. They just chew and nod and pass the ladle like it's sacred. You take another bite. This time, you find something crunchy that may once have been a tooth. You eat it anyway. By the end of the meal, your bowl is empty, your hands are warm, and your soul feels weirdly nourished. Maybe it's the minerals. Maybe it's the community. Maybe you've finally crossed that threshold where your standards have completely eroded and soup is soup is soup. Whatever the case, no one died. That's the real miracle. Winter has officially stopped pretending to be charming. There's no more gentle flurries, no soft crunch underfoot, no childlike wonder in the air. There is only cold, deep, unapologetic, all-consuming cold, the kind that sneaks into your joints at night and hosts secret meetings in your kneecaps, the kind that makes your breath freeze mid-exhale and then mock you for trying. You wake up in a sheet of frost so crisp it crunches when you sit up. You didn't sleep so much as preserve yourself. Your hands are the first to protest. They're red, chapped, cracked in places you didn't know could split. The knuckles look like they've been negotiating with sandpaper. The skin between your fingers flakes with a devotion usually reserved for pastry dough. You flex them once and the sound is somewhere between a creak and a whimper. Still, you get up. Because Mort the goat is screaming again. You trudge outside, hands tucked beneath layers of wool, bark, and questionable felt, but it's no use. The cold gets in anyway. You attempt to make a fist and hear something snap. It might have been a twig in your pocket. You hope it was a twig. The herbalist told you about goose fat. Said it heals what winter steals. She said this while gnawing on something that looked like a petrified slug and smelled like shoe. You didn't ask questions, so now you're back inside your drafty lean-to, clutching a fistful of semi-solid goose fat like it's a miracle balm, and not just bird grease. You scoop some out, thick and cool, and start rubbing it into your hands. It's slippery, it smells like poultry and existential crisis, and it's not entirely clear if you're healing yourself or preparing to roast. Still, after a few minutes, something starts to shift, not in a miraculous, oh wow, I can feel my fingers again sort of way. More like a, these are no longer legally classified as brittle twigs kind of shift. You massage your knuckles with the dedication of a sculptor restoring a statue. The statue is you. The medium is despair. You whisper to your fingers, encouraging things. You say, come on team, we've made it through worse. Which is a lie, but morale is important. Outside, the wind makes a sound like a wailing child arguing with a haunted violin. Your shelter creaks in reply, possibly threatening to collapse again. You ignore it. You're focused. This is your spa day now. You're a cracked, goose-greased warrior, and these hands are your only weapons. Later, you go to the well, not because you want to, but because someone spilled something they insist was medicine, and now you have to fetch more water before the communal rag bath becomes a biohazard. The rope is stiff, the bucket is frozen, and your fingers stick to the wood with the kind of cling that suggests emotional attachment. You yank them off one at a time, quietly apologizing. Bran passes by and raises an eyebrow. You smell like bird, he says. You nod proudly. Therapeutic bird. He doesn't question it. He just gestures toward the chicken coop, like maybe you're next in line to harvest self-care from them too. You consider it. Not seriously, but it's a slow day. The rest of the village is equally broken by the weather. Faces are pale, noses red, eyes constantly squinting against wind and snow like everyone's stuck in a year-long one. Blink. There's less talking now. Conversations are shortened to nods, and vague gestures toward smoke or food. Even Mort speaks less, though when he does, it's usually to scream directly into your spine while you're doing something delicate. Back at your hut, you light the fire. On the third try, you don't even cheer. You just grunt and hold your hands out to it like a peasant god basking in stolen glory. Your fingers feel things again, not joy, not comfort, but sensation. That's something. You keep rubbing the goose fat in nightly now. It's part of the ritual. Fire, fat, whisper to your fingers. Sleep, repeat. You've lost the feeling in your left pinky entirely, but you pretend it's just on vacation. You tell your hands they're doing great. You compliment your thumbs. You call your cracked skin battle-scarred. You name the biggest split Steve. Steve's healing. Winter deepens. The cold becomes less of an event and more of a personality trait. The snow, it doesn't fall anymore, it settles, like it lives here now. But you're still here too. A little cracked, a little greasy, a lot frostbitten in places that shouldn't frostbite, but intact, mostly. Your hands are red and raw and not entirely functional, but they keep working, and so do you. The challenge is issued with the seriousness of a royal decree and the energy of a child high on turnip sugar. Gareth, your neighbor and reluctant mentor in all things, don't die in winter, stands in the middle of the village path, clutching a snowball that has clearly been compressed with the fury of 1,000 disappointments. He grins, that particular kind of grin that says, "This is going to be stupid, and I'm going to enjoy every second of it." You respond, the only way you know how now, by nodding slowly, dramatically, like someone who has nothing to lose and everything to misunderstand. He lobs the first snowball. It's not just a snowball. It's a guided missile disguised as whimsy. It hits you square in the chest, sending a fine mist of powder into your mouth, nose, and emotional stability. You inhale shame. You crouch, scoop, your gloves fumble. You form something vaguely spherical and toss it. It veers left, very left. You're not even sure where it lands, but someone's chicken screams in the distance. Gareth laughs. It echoes. The village begins to gather. You wish they wouldn't. You wish very quietly for many things in that moment. Warmer socks, fewer spectators, a time machine, but none of them arrive. Instead, Bran appears with a stick he declares the line of honor. He draws it in the snow with the exaggerated flair of a man who once saw a sword fight in a traveling puppet show and now considers himself a student of the blade. Duel, he declares. You look at your weapon, a half-melted handful of slush stuck to your mitten, and nod. You step behind the line. You bend your knees. You immediately realize you've bent too far, lose balance, and fall sideways into a drift. It's fine. This is fine. You use the opportunity to gather more snow, pack it tight, and rise from the snowbank like a soggy phoenix. Your opponent is already mid-throw. You dodge. Technically, it grazes your ear and continues on to hit old Marla's fence, which collapses like it was waiting for a reason to give up. Someone cheers. You throw your snowball with all the focus you can summon. It arcs beautifully for one glorious second. You believe. Then it crumbles mid-air into a gentle flurry that kisses Gareth's beard like affection from a confused cloud. The crowd claps anyway. Someone tosses you another handful of snow, unsolicited. It feels like a pity donation. You accept it with grace. And then Gareth switches tactics. He flanks. It's not against the rules, mostly because there are no rules, but still feels like a betrayal of the ancient snow duel code no one ever wrote down. He appears behind your lean-to, emerging like a smug frost goblin, and pelts you in the back with what can only be described as a frozen softball of betrayal. You drop to one knee, not out of defeat, but because your legs have decided to retire. The duel ends not with a final throw, but with someone yelling that the stew is burning, and suddenly the crowd disperses as if none of this ever happened. Gareth walks over, offers a hand. You take it. He pulls you up and pats you on the shoulder. "Not bad, Woodfoot," he says, which is the medieval equivalent of a trophy and a standing ovation. Your lips are blue, your fingers numb, and your dignity scattered somewhere near the chicken coop. But apparently, this was a bonding experience. You are now part of some unwritten tradition involving competition, pain, and mild frostbite. You've lost the duel, but won something else. Respect, maybe. Also, hypothermia, but mostly respect. Milking a cow sounds simple when someone else says it. You'd heard whispers from across the fire. Just tug and talk nice, like she's a sleepy accordion, which made sense in the way that sleep-deprived metaphors sometimes do. But now, standing in the frozen barn, you realize none of it has prepared you for the menace that is Gertrude. She is large, not just big, but mythic, the kind of cow that probably appears in local legends and unsettling lullabies. She watches you with a flat stare, chewing slowly, as if considering the moral consequences of homicide. You crouch beside her with the tiny stool and pail you were handed by someone who clearly doesn't value your life. "Nice cow," you say, voice high and hopeful. She flicks her tail with the casual violence of someone who's done time. Your hands reach out. The air is sharp, your fingers stiff, but you make contact with something that feels like damp leather and ancient judgment. You begin the motion you've practiced exactly once on a goat that may have been asleep. A few drops hit the pail. You smile. You're doing it. Then she shifts. A minor adjustment at first, a step to the side, a tilt of the hip, a quiet rearrangement of weight that suggests she's still deciding whether you're a threat or just an idiot. You keep going, trying not to think about how cold the pail is or how Gertrude's eye seems to be narrowing. Then, with the speed of a collapsing shed, she sits right on you. The air leaves your body in a noise that can only be described as concerned accordion. Your spine flattens against the icy floor and the pail crumples like a sad tin hat. You can't move, but you can hear the barn door creak open. Footsteps crunch toward you. Someone coughs, laughs, and then applause. Applause. You are being applauded while a cow uses you as furniture. Bran leans over and offers you a piece of dried beet as consolation. You wave him away with the one hand not currently pinned under Gertrude's haunch, and he nods solemnly, like this is all part of some ancient rite of passage. Gertrude shifts again. You wheeze in response. Your relationship has evolved past predator and prey. You are now roommates. Eventually, and without explanation, she stands. The release of pressure is so sudden, you nearly roll across the barn. You crawl away slowly, not because you're in pain, though you are, but because you refuse to give her the satisfaction of speed. She watches you with that same unreadable stare, chewing with the smugness of a being who has never filed taxes and never will. You sit against the wall and stare back, and in that moment, something passes between you. Not affection, certainly not forgiveness, but an understanding. You have tried to milk her and failed. She has tried to flatten you and succeeded. The scoreboard is clear, but you also didn't scream. You didn't run. And somewhere, deep in those ancient bovine eyes, she seems to recognize that. You nod. She snorts. A pact is formed. Fragile, unspoken, and slightly humiliating. When you return to the village, covered in hay and existential questions, they don't ask what happened. They don't need to. Gertrude's reputation precedes her like thunder before a storm. Instead, they clap you on the back and offer you soup that tastes like root water and mild encouragement. You lasted longer than Bran, someone says. That night, you dream of soft moos and the crushing weight of respect. You fall asleep hungry. Again, your stomach issuing long, theatrical groans like it's auditioning for a role in a tragic opera. The straw beneath you crackles when you shift. one piece doing its best to impersonate a splinter. Your makeshift blanket smells like goat and betrayal. Outside, the wind sings its nightly elegy, pushing cold through the gaps in the wall with the precision of a petty god. You've layered every article of clothing you own, including the moss-lined sock you swore you'd only wear ironically, and still, the chill kisses your spine like it's wooing you. Somewhere between shivers and sighs, your brain gives up. You slip into dreams without permission, your subconscious apparently tired of this medieval fan fiction you've been trapped in. Warmth seeps in first gentle, indulgent warmth that wraps around you like the perfect weighted blanket you once owned before time became strange and porridge became morally questionable. Then comes the smell. Butter. Not churned goat fat pretending to be butter, but the real thing golden, sizzling on a skillet that doesn't need to be rotated every 4 minutes to avoid the hot spot. You hear it before you see it. The gentle hiss of batter meeting pan, the promise of something soft inside and crisp outside, something square, gridded, and blessed by modern engineering. Waffles. Towering, steaming waffles stacked like the ruins of a delicious empire, butter pools in their sunken squares, syrup, real syrup, not boiled pine sap with lies, cascades and golden rivers. A fork, a clean one, slices through them like a gentle breeze through silk. You lift a perfect bite, the aroma practically singing in 4-part harmony. You can feel your hands, warm, uncracked, gripping ceramic rather than bark. You weep a little. Then someone speaks. Turnip? It echoes oddly. Too real. Too nasal. Your eyelids twitch. The syrup turns gray. The waffle vanishes mid-bite. Oi! You want this turnip or not? You wake up with a sound that's somewhere between a sob and a cough. There's a figure looming over you, outlined by dawn and poor decisions. He's holding something lumpy and beige green, which he appears to think is a gift. It's definitely a turnip, possibly two, possibly one with a growth. You blink, still halfway between syrup and reality. He takes your silence as consent and drops the thing onto your chest. It lands with a thunk that should come with its own warning label. You stare at it. It stares back. You're not entirely convinced it's not alive. You throw it, not in anger. Exactly. More in protest. Like your hands can't bear the betrayal. It thuds against the wall and rolls under a cot, where it will probably befriend a rat and plot revenge. The man shrugs and leaves. Apparently, turnip rejection is not new here. You lay back down, clutching your gut like a dramatic Victorian widow. Your dream is already fading, replaced by the draft sneaking into your socks, and the realization that breakfast will likely involve chewing something that crunches in a way roots were never meant to. You sigh, stare at the ceiling, and mourn a food group you haven't seen in weeks. Joy. Later, you're handed a bowl of something that might be porridge, but could also be a failed science experiment. You poke it with a spoon until it jiggles. It might jiggle back. Around the fire, villagers chew with the resigned patience of people who know this is just how life is. One woman gnaws on a strip of dried mushroom like it's a luxury. Someone else bites into a beet with the same enthusiasm you once reserved for stuffed crust pizza. Across the room, a child is licking a rock. No one stops him. You close your eyes again, just briefly, hoping the waffle will return. It doesn't. What does return is the sound of Mort the goat chewing on your sleeve and the sharp scent of someone's foot tincture heating on the coals. Your eyes water. Not from emotion. The day trudges forward, pulling you with it. You carry water. You stack wood. You barter half a stale biscuit for a handful of slightly warm moss and pretend you're not mentally calculating the sodium content of every imaginary fast food menu you can recall. Dinner is a stew made from foraged things, which includes a suspicious number of twigs. You chew carefully, just in case one of them files a complaint. That night, when the sky turns velvet and the wind resumes its petty campaign, you crawl back into your straw pile. You clutch the remains of your dignity, wrap yourself in the faint hope of tomorrow, and whisper softly to no one, "Please, just one waffle, just one." Somewhere in the shadows, a turnip rolls, waiting. Spring doesn't arrive so much as stumble in late, unwashed, and missing half its warmth. But it's here, technically. The snow that once ruled everything has surrendered in slow, damp patches, revealing a world that looks like it's been through a divorce. The ground is mud, the sky is still sulking, the trees are alive again, but only out of spite. You step outside your hut and feel something that could almost be described as warmth, though it's the kind that feels uncertain about its own existence. Still, your bones acknowledge it. The air doesn't slice anymore, it sighs. You take that as victory. You are, against all odds, alive. You've lost weight, mostly from running out of things that count as food. Your clothes hang off you like they've given up on structure. Your boots are held together by moss and optimism, and your hair has achieved a texture that could only be described as feral pride. You smell like the inside of a campfire that married a barn. You've accepted this. Everyone else has too. The villagers nod at you now, not politely, but with a kind of weary respect, like they're acknowledging another survivor of the same terrible joke. You've stopped being the strange one who doesn't know how to hold a shovel and become the strange one who didn't die. It's an upgrade. Bran passes you a piece of bread this morning without muttering about wasting grain. That's practically affection here. The herbalist even waves from across the path, though she still scares you. Somewhere behind her hut, Mort bleats. You look over your shoulder and see him trotting toward you, headbutting a bucket just to assert dominance over inanimate objects. You smile despite yourself. You never meant to bond with a goat, but survival is funny like that. You scratch behind his ear. He tries to eat your sleeve. This is love, apparently. The river is flowing again, and you can finally hear something other than the wind. It sounds like forgiveness. The water's still too cold to touch, but you do anyway. You need to remember what alive feels like. It burns, but in a good way, like you're thawing from the inside out. Later, the village gathers for what they call Spring Feast, which is a generous term for everyone bringing slightly less rotten food to the same table. You sit between Bran and the woman who owns the chicken that's been judging you since December. Someone pours fermented root juice into wooden cups, and you drink because it's there. It tastes like someone tried to make wine out of disappointment, but it warms your throat. Conversation drifts lazily. No one mentions the hunger. No one talks about who didn't make it. But everyone laughs more than usual, quietly, cautiously, like they're testing out joy again. You laugh too, though it sounds strange. In your mouth, after months of biting back curses and chewing bark. When the sun dips below the hills, you wander back to your hut, not quite ready to let go of the firelight. Mort follows, chewing something that might have once been your glove. The night smells different now. Wet soil, thawing wood, faint smoke from distant fires, all familiar, but softer. The kind of smell that promises life again. You stand outside a moment longer, staring at the crooked village where you almost froze, almost starved, almost gave up, and somehow didn't. Your hands are rough, your back aches, and your stomach still growls like a vengeful spirit. But there's something steady in your chest. A quiet, strange peace. Inside your hut, you collapse onto your straw bed and pull the ragged blanket over your shoulders. Mort settles beside you, snoring like a malfunctioning flute. For the first time in months, the silence feels kind. You survived, which, if you're being honest, still surprises you.